band called Jounce, and he has his own podcast with Mike Morona called The Adventures of Danny and Mike.
And he does do voice acting work, too, which is nice.
He does voice acting work, and, you know, he goes to different conventions for the Pete and Pete reunion panels, so, yeah, he's still pretty busy.
Well, that's good. I mean, it is good to see, you know, him still doing work like that. He was, like, a pretty, probably one of the more popular early 90s Nickelodeon characters.
Yeah, because Danny would feature in other shows that we'll be talking about later on, but yeah,
Indeed,
Danny, and not to mention that Danny was also in the Mighty Ducks movies.
Yeah, he was. People sometimes forget that.
Similar to Mike Morona, in which he was in the first 2 Home Alone movies.
Which was awesome. The first time I saw Home Alone, I was like, hey, isn't that Michael Morona?
Yep.
And then I saw him like, huh, interesting.
Good times of realizing who else is in shows that you know.
Yeah, and not to mention, I think that, you know, everybody can agree on this, but The Adventures of Pete and Pete had the most eclectic soundtrack.
Yeah, it did. It had a good soundtrack.
Yeah, it had, you know, Polaris, it had The Magnetic Field, it had Luscious Jackson, it had Sid Straw, it had The Six, it had various indie rock bands and pop singers that nowadays has gotten the show to be not featured in Nickelodeon due to copyright issues.
Well, that sucks, too.
Yeah, I know. But in itself, the Adventures of Pete and Pete, even though it was watched by a lot of kids, it wasn't as mainstream when it first came out, mostly because it was an acquired taste. It had a lot of weird moments that not everybody could get into, but there was a blog that wrote a review on Pete and Pete about how he mentioned that it's probably the most well-written kids show that ever came out.
It definitely had, like, moments like that in terms of, like, kids shows. It made for a great show.
It was a great show. I wish people would give it more credit.
I definitely put it above Clarissa Explains It All.
Yeah, so would I. I would put Pete and Pete above Clarissa Explains It All. Not that I say that Clarissa Explains It All is bad, but you can definitely tell that it was from the 90s. Pete and Pete has a more timeless feel.
Yeah.
Alright, now let's get into 94. Now, 94, it was a pretty big year because there were a couple of movies that came out during that time period. Pulp Fiction and The Lion King. But as for TV shows for Nickelodeon, and, you know, since it is 2014, these are the shows that will be celebrating its 20th anniversary. One of the first that came out around the 90s was Allegra's Window. And that was the first one that was created by Jim Jenkins.
It was Nick Jr.
Well, yeah, this is Nick Jr. There's really not much to say about it. And the same thing with Gullah Gullah Island as well. That also came out in 94.
I do like Gullah Gullah Island, though. The same person who played Kyra on Kenan and Kel was actually on that show.
Yeah, that's right.
So, it's kind of funny to see her have 2 different personalities.
Because in the first one, you know, Vanessa from Gullah Gullah Island, she was like the sassy girl. And then Kyra in Kenan and Kel, she was like the girl who always told on the parents of when Kenan and Kel got in trouble. Or she had a crush on Kel, saying, "Oh, I love you."
She was always hitting on Kel, and then there was, the episode called The Bomb?
I think so.
Like, she was insulting the person that Kel's date. Yeah, it's kind of funny to see that.
But yeah, in terms of Gullah Gullah Island and the window, yeah, basically it was a good stepping point for Nick Jr. They definitely got some better shows later on, which I don't know if you'll get into or not.
We will. The next one is My Brother and Me.
Yeah, this one's kind of a forgettable one.
Well, not only is it forgettable, but if you watch it today, it is so incredibly cheesy.
You can kind of see it was trying to be like Pete and Pete, but it just could not be Pete and Pete.
Well, it wasn't trying to be like Pete and Pete, mostly because it was the first Nickelodeon show that had an African-American cast. I think it was trying to be like the next Family Matters or Fresh Prince.
I'm sorry, JB, but wherever you are, but I do not think that the show is that good.
It is a great show to watch with friends. It is perfect commentary material.
Yeah, it's a great show to riff on. You know, grab a bowl of popcorn, gather a group of friends, and just basically
make fun of it.
Yeah, make fun of it, because there are so many things to make fun of that show. I mean, I understand the show was a huge popular show back then. I mean, it won numerous awards. But around when season 1 ended, the creator and the writers were having arguments about how where the show's direction was going to be, and then eventually it got delayed until it was eventually canceled.
It was just one of those shows that just never really took off. Like, I get what they were trying to do with it, but it just never really caught on.
They feature that show every day, every day in the afternoon for the next 5 years. So it must have been popular for somebody.
Yeah, it was.
I guess it was
a good show for its time.
Yeah, I guess it did appeal to at least somebody, but it definitely, as you guys said, it was one of those shows that is fun to watch with friends and just poke at how funny it really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, now let's get into the other one, which, after Clarissa Explains It All ended its run, Nickelodeon needed another It girl. So we have the next one, The Secret World of Alex Mack.
It's okay.
Yeah, that's basically what I say about it, too. It wasn't bad. It tried new things.
It tried to be different from Clarissa by basically having the teenage girl Alex Mack be dumped with the chemical GC-161 in which she has the superpowers. But here's the thing. The first 2 seasons of Alex Mack are so pointless that you could just skip over it and you won't miss a thing. The whole point of the show was that it was trying to do something different, but the Nickelodeon executives was basically meddling the idea of, we need to have Larissa Olnek be the next Melissa Joan Hart. And it never became decent until the 3rd and 4th season, which came out around 96 and 97 respectively, but...
Don't try and make somebody the next somebody. Try and make them their own somebody. Don't try to make them live up to somebody else. Try and make them be their own thing, because in the end, if you try to make them like a previous thing, just try to make them fit that mold, in the end it will hurt you. And in the end, it kind of did hurt Alex Mack.
Yeah, when season 3 and 4 came out, which were much better in every single way, it was kind of too late because we already had Melissa Joan Hart come back in Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and Joss Whedon created Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which that is the proper show to do if you want to mix a teenage girl with having school and action moments.
Everybody kind of likes Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I wish that Alex Mack would have been like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because I can see where Thomas W. Lynch was trying to do it. He has a distinctive style of trying to create unique concept but have memorable characters. But the problem is that they never got executed properly, which we'll be discussing about in another show that he did in the 90s. It was one of my favorites when I was a kid, but then when I rewatched it again for the Nickelodeon tribute, I was so disappointed about how lackluster and underwhelming it was. It could have been something so much better, and I want to see somebody remake it into something, a lot more like Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those shows that was marred by corporate and such, and you just you wonder like what it could have been. Who knows if we'll ever see something like that again, or I guess we'll always be wondering.
I can't say the best thing about Alex Mack was the season finale, the series finale, in which she fought off against the corporation who gave her the GC-161, and she was taking down the person who was in charge of it. Which, if you think about it, it was sort of like a totalitarian ruled city in which the woman, Danielle Atron, who was in charge of the power plant, she basically took over the entire town. There were schools and buildings named after her. There was no mayor. She pretty much was the ruler of everything. And she was actually pretty cynical and sadistic. But the problem is that they didn't really focus too much about these characters. They mostly focused on Alex Mack and trying to give her everyday situations to deal with, similar to Clarissa. It just didn't work. And then finally, around seasons 3 and 4, it started to get more interesting. Danielle Atron was trying to find the GC-161 kid. And then we had Will introduced to the show, who was trying to find his father, who was kidnapped in the power plant due to him trying to find out, GC-161 was supposed to be distributed as a weight loss drug. And there was supposed to be some sort of, disadvantages of, what would happen if people would actually take it. And then we have the series finale in which Alex defeats Atron, and she finally has the serum that supposedly cures GC-161, and it leaves it on an ambiguous cliffhanger, and we never knew if she took it or not.
But at the same time, she could have seen like how it really would have ended.
That would have been nice. Alright, so the next show that featured around 1994 was Our Real Monsters, the second show that Klasky Csupo ever done. And this was created by Gabor Csupo and Peter Gaffney, who was a writer for Rugrats. This is a show that not a lot of people talk about whenever they think of Klasky Csupo.
That's sad, because I actually like this show. It's one of my favourite things that Klasky Csupo's ever done.
It's definitely a good show. It's a shame people don't seem to talk about it. I know it's still on the 90s or all that, because my friend does get that network. I unfortunately don't. So it was a good show. It had good characters, and, it had it's kind of funny when you think about them doing the Scare School, like, years before Monsters University ever did.
True.
I actually made a meme about that a long time ago. It's just funny, because... the characters are memorable in my opinion. The designs are great. Ickis, Oblina, and Crumb, and really had some good stories. It had the classic Klasky Csupo designs, which usually you really notice Klasky Csupo has a style all its own as they start to make more shows. This is basically where you start to notice that that's a reoccurring style, because this is only their second show, but you notice that it is a lot like Rugrats, and speaking of Rugrats, they did cross over with Rugrats, and this was the first of many Klasky Csupo crossovers that they would do with their own shows.
That is right, they did. You see, interestingly enough with Our Real Monsters was that this was another show that got mixed reactions when it first came out, because many people thought of it as another Ren and Stimpy clone. So, this was a show that was, once again, similar to Rocko's Modern Life, was discarded for a while until it started gaining a bit of a cult following. However, unlike Rocko's Modern Life, in which it, is more mainstream and has become even more synonymous than Ren and Stimpy, Our Real Monsters seems to be being pushed back into the back burner, which is understandable because Klasky Csupo would make a lot more shows for Nickelodeon.
Yeah, that's true. I mean... in terms of the Klasky Csupo, bunch of shows, I would think that the one that would be, on the bottom rung, for me anyway, and it doesn't mean I hate it, it's just, the one that I think the least of is As Told by Ginger, which I think's in the 2000s, so we won't be talking about it too much.
No.
This is why I just said it now. But yeah, Our Real Monsters, to me, wasn't a bad show. It had some good moments and some actually pretty decent scares, for shows that came before it, like Are You Afraid of the Dark, All Real Monsters did a decent job, trying to, present itself as a funny show that, could have some, scary moments, or at least try to. It didn't last too long. I think it only lasted 3 years.
Yeah, it only lasted for 3 years.
Which is a shame, too, because it would have been nice to see it develop more than it did, see the characters, get into more adventures and such. But as you said, Klasky Csupo was the workhorse of Nickelodeon, especially in the 90s. So, I mean, it's understandable for a few reasons that it might be canceled because of all the shows that they would make later as well. Maybe they had to make space to put them into production. You never know when they started production on the other shows. Our Real Monsters, in my opinion, wasn't a bad show. I never really saw it as a Ren and Stimpy ripoff. Like Rocko's Modern Life, I can understand more people calling that a Ren and Stimpy ripoff than Our Real Monsters. But, good show, really. I never really had a problem with it.
Yeah, and to think that it'll be celebrating its 20th anniversary this October.
Well, that's really cool. I wonder if... I doubt Nick will say anything about it, but maybe something will happen on Teen Nick or 90s or all that, and they'll celebrate it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
it'd be nice.
Yeah, it'd be nice. Our Real Monsters, the complete series, is released all on DVD thanks to Shout Factory, so that'll be a great opportunity to pick it up.
Yeah, that's cool, too. At least, Shout Factory has had some pretty mixed reviews on some things, but it's nice to see them do that for the show. again, it is a show that I believe doesn't really get a lot of the credit it deserves. I thought it was fine. One of the first, Nicktoons, a fine